All right, in this section now we're going to talk about what it means for God to be omnipotent.
Omnipotence is logically impossible, a paradox. But they're going to keep saying it anyway, presumably because it sounds better than just saying God is really, really knock your socks off ultra mega powerful. But really it's just a way of saying that their God is a bigger dick than your God. Let's do this. Greetings fellow space travelers, BionicDance here. At first glance, this is probably going to sound like a purely semantic argument, but there is more to it than that. You see, the claims made about their god's power have more than a few flaws, and it sounds rather more like they're trying to retcon what the primitives who wrote their holy book got wrong than it does any kind of genuine description of their deity.
Aquinas says that God can do anything. He is all-powerful. Right? He can do anything. What does that mean? Does it mean that God could, say, sin?
Well, why ever not? Sinning is a matter of decision, of will. As long as one is self-aware and able to choose, why couldn't someone behave like a jerk? And goodness knows that the Christian God has broken his thou shalt not kill commandment often enough. Or is this a case of believing that anything God does is automatically good? But if God can't sin, he can't be all-powerful. If he can't be all-loving. And if he can't anything, he's definitely not all-powerful, and in these cases apparently doesn't have free will. One way or another, their God clearly has limits, so calling him all-powerful is really more of an ego boost than any kind of accurate description.
God being all-powerful, does it mean that he could create, say, a round square or a rock so big that he can't lift it?
It would have to mean those things. If there are any limitations at all, then the term all-powerful cannot apply. I've heard people try to say that God is, quote, a maximally great being, but the damage has already been done. It still seems like more of a whoops, the Bible authors fucked up than it does any kind of legit correction.
Let's talk about this. What does it mean to say that God is all-powerful or omnipotent? So Aquinas says,
ugh, Thomas Aquinas is such a fucking tool. But so many of the people we debate think he's the shit, so I guess we gotta deal with it.
That when we say that God is omnipotent, we mean that God can do whatever is possible. That's what divine omnipotence means.
But what does that mean? I'm not debating semantics anymore. I'm asking what determines what's possible, and how was that limit set? I mean, yes, we can point to paradoxes like the square circle. We can say those are impossible. But look at, for example, the laws of physics. According to the story of creation, weren't those set by God? Don't those set limits on what is and is not possible? And yet, doesn't God break those rules, like, a lot in the Bible? Or at least the laws of cause and effect, where something that happens is something that could exist in our world, but how it became that way isn't. You know, like women who are pillars of salt. The human body does not contain that much sodium, and its physical substance would have to be rearranged on an elemental level, which probably can be done, but not with what is available. If what's possible is the line that cannot be crossed, how do we find it, and where did it come from?
God can do whatever is possible. Some things, like a round square, these kind of things are absurdities, right? They're logically incoherent. There can't possibly be a round square. Aquinas says these kinds of things are just repugnant to being.
Repugnant to being? Reality just didn't like them, and that's why they don't exist. Oh, I'm sure Tommy Boy was just being poetic. I hope. But that's a really bad idea in matters such as these. Being flippant or engaging in hyperbole can lead such debates down such bizarre and unintended paths. Or maybe he wasn't being symbolic at all. Maybe he really did think that reality had some sort of sniff test before it'll let anything through. But if he thinks that, then we're back to asking for a more detailed explanation and more than a tiny bit of evidence to back it up.
Same thing with all those other things, like, can God make a man who is a stone?
Or a woman who's a pillar of salt.
Right, a man by nature is rational. A stone is, of course, not rational.
Not rational? I'm guessing that this is another terminology problem. He probably means self-aware, because describing humans as rational is a joke, and if there's anything a rock isn't, it's irrational. Its existence is quite rational, but its thoughts are non-existent and impossible, so it's really neither rational nor irrational. I don't want to keep going off on semantic tangents, but communication in a debate, discussion, or description is key. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I really do want to know what this guy means, because I don't. There are too many possible interpretations situations made worse by the fact that God-botherers often believe such wacky things.
So these things can't possibly exist. So Aquinas says that to say God's omnipotence means that he can do whatever is possible. This doesn't mean that his power is limited.
Yeah, that's exactly what it means. Either you can do absolutely anything, or your power is limited by something. In fact, this is what the supernatural, what magic is supposed to be, the ability to do the irrational. If a wizard or sorceress is casting a fireball from their hands without any fuel or way to ignite it, simply by their will and a few magic words, they've just done the impossible, at least as far as we've been able to determine. For all we know, magic, as we understand it, may exist, and we just haven't learned to access it yet. But the point is, if God can only do what's possible, and what's possible must be rational, then how did God ever do the vast majority of the spooky stuff that's in the Bible?
In fact, Aquinas says, it's better to say that these contradictory things are things that cannot be done, rather than God cannot do them.
I see what he's trying to say, but the issue is what God can do and whether or not the description of him as omnipotent is justified. I think that any logical person, and logic seems to be the important factor today, would say that God's omnipotence has failed the sniff test. The truly ironic part is that, for believers, this is a good thing. If God isn't genuinely omnipotent, his existence is actually a lot harder to disprove, simply because those logical contradictions cannot be used to show the illogic of his existence. To be fair, that is kind of what he's saying, but he's still insisting on using the term omnipotent, and maximally great isn't a much better term either. So if he wants to avoid getting called out for it in the future, because he so obviously doesn't believe God's omnipotent no matter what he may say, he might want to knock that off. But that would also require his followers to admit that, yeah, maybe their patron deity isn't quite as 100% uber everything as they'd like to claim, and that might wound their pride just a little. It's a fine line to walk, isn't it? Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please, think.
Attention citizens, failure to contribute will result in suspended oxygen privileges. Attention citizens, failure to contribute will result in suspended oxygen privileges. Attention citizens.